The Peaky Blinders were not just a gang. They were a legend born in the dark and rain-soaked streets of Birmingham, England, at the end of the 19th century. In a time marked by poverty, unemployment, and the violence that followed the First World War, they learned to turn despair into power. Their name became a symbol of fear, respect, and control. No one wanted to cross a Peaky Blinder, because doing so was signing your own death sentence. The image of the man in a flat cap, long coat, and cold eyes was not a style, it was a warning. They were said to stitch razor blades into the peaks of their caps. And even if that was more myth than truth, the rumor alone was enough to spread terror through the streets. They fought without mercy, and every fight was a message of dominance and precision. No one escaped their reach. Their leader, Tommy Shelby, was more than a criminal. He was a strategist, a man with the mind of a general and the ambition of a king. He didn't need to shout to command respect, his presence alone was enough. His intelligence and composure allowed him to move the strings of crime, politics, business, and even psychological warfare. The Shelbys didn't just use guns, they used information, manipulation, and fear. The Peaky Blinders were feared because they had no limits. They followed no laws but their own. Wherever they went, they imposed their will. They had contacts in the neighborhoods, in the police, and even in Parliament. Betrayal was a death sentence. They weren't just a street gang, they were an organization, structured, disciplined, and purposeful. Every member knew his role, and every strike was calculated with military precision. The fear they inspired didn't come only from their actions, but from their reputation. They didn't have to kill every enemy, just let the rumor spread. The name Peaky Blinders was whispered like a curse, as if saying it too loud could bring disaster. They were the masters of the night, the silence, and their shadow reached far beyond Birmingham. They were feared because they were unpredictable. One day they would strike a deal with a politician, and the next, eliminate him if necessary. They had no morals, only results. Yet behind the crime there was a code, a family, a sense of loyalty that made them invincible. Tommy Shelby used to say business wasn't personal, but everyone knew that if you touched a Shelby, hell itself would come for you. The power of the Peaky Blinders was not in their guns, but in their minds. They knew when to attack, when to retreat, and when to let fear do the work for them. Every enemy was destroyed without mercy, but always with elegance. While others acted on impulse, the Shelbys planned every move like chess masters. They were feared because they embodied the perfect mix of brutality and intelligence. Their violence was never random, it was deliberate, strategic. Every blow carried a message: no one stands above the Peaky Blinders. And those who dared to doubt it learned the hard way that it wasn't a threat, it was a promise. Over time, their name became legend. Some hated them, others admired them, but everyone remembered them. They were the voice of the forgotten, the kings of the streets, the men who rose from nothing to challenge an empire. And though many tried to destroy them, their legacy never died. Because fear, once planted, never disappears. The Peaky Blinders never sought glory, they sought control. And they achieved it. In a world ruled by violence, they learned to wield it like a tool. It wasn't just about money or power, it was about proving that even the broken can become the most feared. That's why the Peaky Blinders left a mark that time could never erase. They were more than a gang, they were a symbol. A reminder that strength without strategy fades, but intelligence with ferocity conquers. Every glance, every word, every cigarette lit in the face of an enemy was a silent message. They weren't chaos, they were almost a criminal corporation. The Peaky Blinders operated with an almost military structure. Each member had a role, from bookies and runners to collectors and enforcers. Unlike other gangs, they maintained internal loyalty and a strict code of silence. Their operations were so well coordinated that the police struggled for years to infiltrate them. They were young, but they thought like seasoned mobsters. Yes, there were real leaders behind the myth, and none of them were named Tommy Shelby. The most well-known real leader was Thomas Gilbert, also known as Kevin Mooney, a charismatic yet brutal man. While the series Peaky Blinders drew inspiration from figures like him, Tommy Shelby is fictional. Even so, the themes of leadership, power, and ambition in the show perfectly capture the spirit of these real men. They weren't just fighters, they were strategists, and their true weapon was fear. Every legend has an ending, and theirs was as violent as their rise. Over time, the police grew stronger, and rival gangs like the Birmingham Boys emerged. The gang wars became bloodier and more frequent. By the 1920s, the Peaky Blinders began to fade away. Some were killed, others imprisoned, and a few merged into newer crime groups. The myth faded, but the legend had only just begun. More than a century later, they still inspire fear, fashion, and fascination. Popular culture brought them back through the series Peaky Blinders, blending history with cinematic fiction. Today, their image stands as a symbol of rebellion, power, and British style. But behind the glamour and the famous quotes, we can't forget what they really were: young men with no opportunities, who chose crime as their path to glory. They weren't heroes. They were survivors. And that is what made them legendary. Decades later, filmmakers and writers rediscovered their story. The romantic image of a gangster who looked like a gentleman became irresistible. It wasn't just about violence anymore, it was about identity, ambition, and the illusion of control. When the series Peaky Blinders premiered, it gave a face to that myth: the cold, calm stare of Tommy Shelby. Through him, the world saw not just a criminal, but a man fighting against the weight of destiny. The show may be fiction, but it revived real conversations about class, power, and what it means to survive. Viewers around the world saw themselves in that struggle, the desire to rise above your circumstances, no matter the cost. That's why the story of the Peaky Blinders continues to resonate today. It's not just a gangster tale, it's a mirror reflecting how far people are willing to go when they have nothing left to lose. And their aesthetic, the clean suits and cold expressions, became a cultural movement. Fashion brands, barbers, and even wedding themes began to imitate their look. The Peaky Blinders style became a global trend, turning a century-old gang into modern-day icons. Their image, once feared, was now celebrated. But beneath that glamour lies a warning: style can make evil look beautiful, and that's what makes their legend so dangerous. Still, the fascination doesn't fade. Every generation rediscovers them: the young rebels, the outsiders, the men who turned crime into a statement. The Peaky Blinders remind us that rebellion never really dies. It just changes its suit. To truly understand their legacy, we have to look beyond the violence. The Peaky Blinders represent the hunger for control in a world that offers none. They were born in the chaos of industrial change, where human lives were cheap and dreams were expensive. Their crimes were brutal, yes, but they came from a place of desperation. That's why their story still feels human. It's about ambition, identity, and survival. Even historians admit that separating fact from fiction is nearly impossible now. Records are missing, names are lost, and stories have merged into legend. Maybe that's fitting, because the Peaky Blinders were never meant to be remembered as men. They were meant to be remembered as a feeling, the mix of fear and fascination that still lingers when you hear their name. Today, their influence reaches far beyond Birmingham. You can see echoes of their style in movies, music, and modern subcultures. Every sharp suit, every tilted cap, every quiet man with dangerous eyes, that's the spirit of the Peaky Blinders reborn. They may have vanished from the streets, but their presence is everywhere. And maybe that's the real reason they were so feared. Not because of what they did, but because of what they represented: power without permission, elegance without mercy, rebellion without regret. More than a century later, we're still captivated by the same question that terrified Birmingham long ago: what happens when the poor learn to act like kings? They weren't heroes. They weren't villains. They were a storm in human form, and their legend still refuses to die. Reached for a weapon. Their fashion became their signature and their message: we're not like the rest. They weren't chaos, they were almost a criminal corporation. The Peaky Blinders operated with an almost military structure. Each member had a role, from bookies and runners to collectors and enforcers. Unlike other gangs, they maintained internal loyalty and a strict code of silence. Their operations were so well coordinated that the police struggled for years to infiltrate them. They were young, but they thought like seasoned mobsters. Yes, there were real leaders behind the myth, and none of them were named Tommy Shelby. The most well-known real leader was Thomas Gilbert, also known as Kevin Mooney, a charismatic yet brutal man.